Hi, everybody. Welcome to our preview video on administrative agency law. It's very hard for me to believe that we are already entering week 9 of the semester, and this is our last research topic. So what I'm going to do for this topic is actually, rather than go through how to find administrative agency regulations, I'm going to use this PowerPoint to introduce you to what administrative agency regulations are, because it's kind of this unusual not branch of the government. In fact, I know we talked a lot in our other units about the sources of law, and we spent extensive time with case law and the judicial branch. And of course, we spent time with the statutes and the legislative branch, the branch that we traditionally think of as making law. But the truth is, there's an awful lot of law that we interact with every single day that really stems from what are called administrative agencies. So what I'd like you to do is actually pause the video for a second, and I want you to think for a minute if you can think of any of those agencies that have acronyms like the IRS or the FDA. Pause the video for a second and see how many you can come up with and then come back. Okay, did you do that? If you came up with what we call the alphabet soup of government agencies, you have identified administrative agencies. I easily just mentioned a couple of them right before I paused the video, but you could have come up with others like HUD, like Housing and Urban Development. Maybe you came up with the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, maybe the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. I mentioned the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service, and we could keep going. How about the FEC, this SEC, the FCC? This is the alphabet soup of government agencies, and there's dozens of them. So what we're going to talk about briefly in this video is where they come from, because these agencies are a huge source of law for us. They regulate everything from all the topics listed here: the environment, how and when we pay our taxes. How about the last time you bought medicine or got a prescription from your doctor and you looked at the medicine bottle? That's all regulated by the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. How many of you look at the contents, the dietary contents of food you buy in the grocery store to see how many calories and how much sugar is in there? Why are those there? That's an FDA regulation. And I even put on here licensing. If anyone in this class has a driver's license, you know that that is regulated by a state agency, the Registry of Motor Vehicles. Doesn't that agency tell us how old we have to be to get a driver's license, the requirement to get that driver's license? But what about other licensing? Does anyone in the class have a license to do their job other than a driver's license? For example, I need a bar license to do my job. If you are a nurse or a teacher, you need a license to do that as well. And that is all a matter of state regulation. So the big question for us is, where do all these regulations come from? Because the last time I checked, all of these agencies are not mentioned in the Constitution. So take a minute, and I also posted an article on Blackboard for you guys called The Unofficial Fourth Branch of Government. And that is true. Administrative agency law is often referred to as that unofficial fourth branch of government because it's such a huge source of law. So when we talk about administrative agencies, there's actually a lot to talk about, but we're really just going to hit a few highlights. First of all, administrative agencies have the authority to make law. When an administrative agency writes a law, we call it a rule or a regulation. Those are the terms we use. When we say the word law, we usually refer to a statute from Congress or the legislative branch. Rules and regulations are the terms we use for administrative agencies. Administrative agency rules and regulations, therefore, have the force of law. If you were wondering if that's true or not, just ask yourself what happens if you don't pay your taxes one year. Exactly, it's the law. Also, what's really interesting about administrative agencies is that they actually have two functions. Within the same administrative agency, they can pass rules and regulations that are law, but they also have their own internal court systems that are run by administrative judges, or what are also known as administrative law judges. There is no jury function, but these administrative agency judges resolve disputes just like a court of law does, but as to a specific agency regulation. There is a very limited type of appeal to the federal court system. I'm not going to go through all of that right now, but we'll kind of talk about it throughout the rest of the couple of semesters, how many matters that are governed by administrative agencies actually begin at the agency level. And then if the parties continue the dispute, there is a right of appeal or a right to take your case to the court system, but it has to begin at the agency level. Okay, so now a little bit about the rulemaking process. I'm sorry this slide has so many dense words on it, but I think it's really important for us to understand when we're talking about administrative rules and regulations, and we're saying that they have the force of law, we kind of want to know where that authority comes from, because it's not spelled out in the Constitution the same way the judicial branch and the legislative branch are in the Constitution. So administrative agencies get their source from a couple of different ways, but the primary way I want to focus on is that some agencies are considered, there's kind of like under the executive branch. That's why in recent times, last 4 years, we've heard a lot about Trump sort of being able to pull back some of those agency regulations. And that also means for some agencies, the president has the power to appoint the head of the agency when he or she enters office. Some agencies are independently created, and the president lacks the power to do that. For our everyday purposes, however, the agencies operate the same. When we're trying to ask ourselves comply or not comply with an agency rule, we don't ask ourselves, is it an executive agency? Is it an independent agency? We just follow what it says. The other piece to think about when we think about the authority for agencies to make law is that it does begin with Congress. The creation of all of these numerous agencies was Congress saying, we can't do it all. We can pass laws, we are the legislative branch, but we can't be experts on the environment, on taxes, on food and drug, on consumer product and safety, on employment. What about OSHA and workplace safety? We know that Congress can't be experts on all of that. So through a set of laws, including something called the Administrative Procedure Act, Congress delegated some of its lawmaking power to the agencies, said, here, you do that. But that doesn't mean that the agencies act in a vacuum. It can just say, we're the EPA, we need some new environmental regulations, let's just pass them. The agencies take their authority from Congress. First, Congress passes what's called an enabling statute, and that's just a law. Then you can take any one of the environmental laws, for example, like the Clean Air Act or the Clean Water Act. I'll even use as an example the Affordable Health Care Act or Obamacare. So Congress passes a comprehensive statute. But in that statute, there is delegation of power to administrative agencies to make rules that help promulgate and enforce that statute, kind of like the nuts and bolts and details, if you think of it that way. And then Congress turns to the agencies in charge and says, now you make the rules. I'm going to use the example of a relatively recent rule that came out of Obamacare or the Affordable Health Care Act. And that is that the last time you were at a restaurant, which actually may have been a while now due to coronavirus, but the last time you were at a restaurant, did you notice that the calorie count is now on the menu in a lot of restaurants? Even if you go to Dunkin' Donuts, it's up there on the big board. It tells you how many calories are in your donuts. You may be thinking to yourself, you're right. That is kind of a recent change. About 4 or 5 years ago, I know now it's probably more than that, we didn't have that. That came out of the Affordable Health Care Act. So what happened was part of the Affordable Health Care Act was to charge the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, with the process of creating rules about what this calorie count menu item would look like. The details of doing that would be way too much to put into a statute. There's all kinds of questions like, do we have to post, who actually has to post the calorie counts? Is it every single food establishment? Is it every single restaurant? What about movie theaters and airplanes and grocery stores that also serve food for consumption? Do we have to break it down by the actual pizza slice or the whole pie? What about a specialty item of the day that a restaurant is creating? How do they do that? There's a lot of questions about it. So all of those details, that's what goes to the administrative agency to pass rules. So how does the agency do this? First, the agency drafts what's called a proposed rule and says, here's our charge from Congress, here's what we've been asked to do, and here's the proposed rule. You can actually think of this as kind of being a very detailed bill. Remember the way Congress passed laws, or the legislative branch pass laws, the legislature drafts a bill first, and then the congresspersons debate it, and then it becomes, after it's been voted on, a rule of law. Well, the administrative agency process is really similar. There's a proposed rule, and it gets published. You may be asking yourself, where would I ever see this? And you're right, most of us don't. But if you work in a regulated industry, you have attorneys, lawyers, and paralegals following this for you. We'll talk about that more in class. But the public has an opportunity to view that proposed rule, gets to look at it. And it's published in a book called the Federal Register. Now, the Federal Register is actually kind of like a newspaper. It comes out every single day that the federal government is open, and it's very thin, like a newspaper material. And in it lists every single action that the administrative agencies are taking on that day, including proposed rules. Then the agency will set what's called a comment period, where the public, including all the affected industries like restaurants, bars, movie theaters, airplanes, schools, anywhere that food is being served, they have an opportunity to comment on this proposed rule. What is it that works? What doesn't work? Do they need more time to comply? Do they want it expanded more? All those details. And the agency receives those comments. So this is a very public process. The comment period could be 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, after which the comment period will close, and then the agency will issue a final rule. Now, the final rule goes into a set of books called the Code of Federal Regulations. And that is kind of like looking at the US Code or the Massachusetts General Laws. At that point, you're looking at the final book of the Code of Federal Regulations. You're looking at the existing regulations. And they are organized exactly like statutes. They're organized by topic. So all your food and drug laws are in the same place. All your IRS laws are in the same place. If you want another recent example, you can actually think about President Trump's change to the tax law. He was able to pass a law from Congress, really extensively changing both corporate taxes and personal taxes. But it took the IRS like a year or so to come up with the new regulations implementing those new tax changes. So I just want to mention that one too. The state also has state regulations. As I mentioned, my bar license is governed by the state, as are numerous other topics. This is how citations look when they are cited and when we go to find them by citation. They look a lot like statutes, don't they? The federal ones are by the title, the 21 CFR section 101.11. Massachusetts is called the Code of Massachusetts Regulations, 8 CMR section 8. Those are actually the regulations for what it takes to become a nurse. So what are we going to do in class? I know that was a lot of information, but I wanted you to have an overview of how these agencies make their laws through that notice and comment period. That's really important to understanding the regulatory process. I'll leave you with this one thought is, who as a matter of like their everyday work works with regulations? And the answer is any lawyer or paralegal working in a regulated industry. I'll go back to the environmental example. If you work in the area of environmental law, if you represent, let's say, the Sierra Club, or if you represent corporations that have to dispose of radioactive waste or any matter, or let's say has a factory with a smokestack and you're trying to figure out what is safe for that factory to emit, those companies work heavily with lawyers that know the environmental regulations so that they can comply with those. So in class, we'll go over more about where to find these. Take a look on Blackboard because I posted some non-Westlaw websites where you can also find regulations just to give you an idea of what they look like. And then I'll also show you how to locate them on Westlaw. And hint, has to do with the subject matter index. All right, have a great weekend, everybody. Happy Halloween to those celebrating, and I'll see you next week.